This is video of Debbie Collier inside a Family Dollar store in Georgia at around 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. She's purchasing a red tote, a blue tarp, a poncho, paper towels, and a torch lighter. After leaving the store, her daughter Amanda received a Venmo for over $2,000, which included a cryptic message from her mom. "They are not going to let me go. Love you. There is a key to the house in the blue flower pot by the door." Debbie was found the next day burnt and partially naked 15 minutes away from that convenience store, which was about an hour north of her home in Athens. From the beginning, investigators said it was a homicide and it was personal. But after 2 months, no one has been arrested, and it seems like the homicide theory may or may not be true. And now Debbie's daughter, Amanda, the one who received that Venmo and that strange message, is speaking out publicly for the first time, answering questions on the Crime on the Record podcast hosted by a relative of hers. In the podcast, Amanda says she's been cleared by investigators and her mom died by suicide. Tonight, we'll take a look at that podcast with our own investigators and our own experts. I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you here tonight for closing arguments. This hour, we're going to take a closer look at what's really been one of the most puzzling stories, mysteries, death investigations that we've covered in quite some time. We're talking about Debbie Collier. And it all began at the crime scene, right? So you have or is it a crime scene, right? That's the question we're going to talk about tonight. But, you know, once investigators get there, you want to know, well, what happened here? What happened? And from the beginning, we were hearing this was a homicide investigation. So all of us covering the story and trying to figure out what happened presumed and assumed this was a murder case. And as we heard some more of the peculiar facts surrounding all of it, it sort of confirmed that. You know, what we heard, the limited information that we heard and what we learned as we saw videos and everything, none of it made a lot of sense, but it was, you know, we trusted investigators who said, yeah, this is a homicide investigation. So when that happens, then it's all about, well, okay, we kind of know what happened, sort of, but who did it? Who's responsible? Who would take the life of this mom from Georgia? What possible reason would you have for taking her life? I mean, everything we heard, she was living a pretty normal kind of life. There was nothing peculiar. She wasn't up to anything. Didn't seem to have any enemies in the world. Like, who would do that? You know, and along with that is the question of why would you do that? But now we're hearing maybe that's not what happened. Maybe it's not a homicide investigation. Maybe it's something different. And, you know, we heard little bits and pieces, some coming through leaks and reports that, hey, maybe this was an accident, or maybe she took her own life. And wow, that's a lot different. That's way different, because investigators were so convinced in the beginning based upon what they saw at the scene. So in trying to understand all of this, it's been difficult, again, because investigators limited information and people connected have not really been speaking out. But now someone is. Amanda Bearden gave a shocking, absolutely shocking interview. You know, earlier today, I had a list of things I was going to do. And then I started watching the Crime on the Record podcast. And for 90 minutes, I did nothing but watch it. This interview was revealing. I mean, you watch the thing at the end of it, I was like, you know, Amanda Bearden, this life that she has led and who she is, you get a much clearer picture of her, and she's filling in the blanks on some of the facts surrounding all of this. And she revealed one thing that really surprised me. It was almost a confirmation of what we heard sort of leaked beforehand, which was how her mom died. Now, you have to understand, everyone that's been covering and following the story, social media and other places, have all been looking at Amanda as a potential suspect in a homicide investigation, right? Based upon just the strange circumstances and obviously the Venmo and the transaction of money that she got, right? Follow the money, follow the money. Well, today we listened to, or I did, and you need to do it after the show. Here's Amanda Bearden on the Crime on the Record podcast talking about the death of her mother.
You've come out and said that you believe it was suicide, correct?
Yes. No one saw her that day prior on Friday. There were actions. My mom was like giving away things that, now looking back on, I'm like, well, that was weird. Even when I seen her Friday, because we hadn't seen each other in a minute, I saw tears in her eyes. I'd never seen her that sad.
Okay, so, the premise to all this, again, everyone was looking at her as potential suspect, someone that would need to be cleared in all this because of that transfer of money, the relationship. You always look at the people closest to the victim, but we may not even be looking at a homicide investigation anymore. I'm not sure. I don't know where we are in all of this, but I want to bring in our special guests to get a little more clarity. Joining us tonight in Alabaster, Alabama, the hosts of the Crime on the Record podcast, Candace and Jason Lawhorn, are with us. Jason, Candace, great to see you tonight. Thanks so much. But you owe me 90 minutes of my life because I was watching that interview and doing nothing else. Can you start and give me a little background about the podcast and about any connection that you have to the family here?
Well, Amanda and I are cousins. So we grew up together when we were younger. We all lived in South Carolina. And then at some point, my immediate family moved back to Alabama and they stayed there. And once her parents divorced, we kind of lost touch for a bit. It wasn't until I saw this come out that I immediately reached out to both Jeffrey and her to get back in touch. And having the platform that we do, we wanted to, try to help in any way we could.
So, Jason, you already have the podcast before anything happens here, right? You've been doing this for a while, both of you together.
Yeah, we have. And we had done a few episodes on Debbie's case prior to having Amanda on last night. And we kind of gone back and forth on whether we were going to cover Debbie's case or not, just out of respect to the family. But we just felt like there was not so much trying to prove innocence or guilt, but just providing a different perspective on looking at Amanda, because everybody sees her as a suspect instead of a person. And we don't have all the facts, and we just felt like it was important to, at least have people see her as a person. So that's why we chose to do it.
And mission accomplished. I'm telling you, I feel like I know so much more about her. We cover it from the outside looking in. People, for obvious reasons, don't necessarily want to come on television and talk about things like this. But the atmosphere, the tone, and everything in that podcast made it very revealing. And Candace, you're not just a podcaster, you're a therapist as well?
I am, yes, I'm a psychotherapist.
Well, I mean, that explains a lot of the way the whole thing happened. So from your perspective, obviously you know a lot about the story going in, but as you're speaking with Amanda for 90 minutes, what sort of unexpected moments occurred? What surprised you a little bit?
I think for us, the biggest shocker was to see the way she felt about the police. I mean, because of seeing so much of the coverage from Jeffrey and how harsh he has been towards the police, we were kind of taken aback that she was so impressed with the police officers that she has dealt with.
That was interesting, right? And it seemed like she had a lot of contact with police, Jason, that she was kind of in communication. We've heard some of those, you know, the calls that were made, that were released, the calls to police, but she was having seemingly an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, that is what she revealed to us, because we were kind of curious about that as well. You know, with police not talking to anyone, you know, how the details of the case and what she knew, but it did seem like that not only did she have quite a few conversations with police, but even after being, as she said last night, interrogated by them, the fact that she still had so much respect for them, and even going out to say that the one investigator, you know, he felt like it was his responsibility because he felt so strongly to take care of what he considered his mom, is what she was saying. So I'm with Candace on the way that she just spoke about law enforcement, because I don't know too many people that speak that highly of law enforcement after being interrogated several times.
Not at all. And I mean, you think about it, okay, they're investigating the death of your mother and they're interrogating you. So it's like, wait a minute, it's my mom. And you can understand how things go. And it usually does go that way. Like everyone else, this case has all these very peculiar facts and circumstances, but many people are trying to put them together and have a view of the case based upon the information that we've learned. Did anything that you learned, or just by speaking with Amanda and hearing her, I mean, at length, talk about things, did it change your mind about anything in the case?
I don't think so. I think that, you know, starting out, we did not have a conclusion to this. I mean, we just wanted to provide, you know, just like in a trial, you can't have the prosecution and then just go to the jury. I mean, you need the defense as well. And I felt like her having both sides would be a good thing, but we still had not come to any conclusion. And recently, after hearing, you know, that the police had informed her she's been cleared, and then talking to her last night and hearing about these conversations with the police, I mean, we've kind of been in her corner that, you know, she has been cleared for quite a while now.
Yeah, and I will be honest, like I said on the podcast last night, when we first found out about this, we first heard about the case, I thought she did it. Like I was on that side of it. And the more we learned, and you know, I kind of started to get the feeling that maybe that wasn't the case. And then, you know, so I'd felt that way before we talked last night, but it just really, for me, it just really solidified everything that I'd already thought.
What, from your perspective, that's interesting, Jason, was there a particular fact, piece of evidence, scenario, timeline? What was it that sort of changed your mind a little bit? They're like, hey, wait a minute, this is something else.
Yeah, I don't know if there was one specific thing I could say this is what it was, but it was, I listened to the 911 calls several times, and, you know, I thought either she was an amazing actress or, you know, this had to be, you know, legitimate. And then her not coming out and just trying to defend herself over and over again, like most people, you know, would. And she took an active role in trying to assist the police. I know there are times when suspects want to be close to the investigation so they can try and figure out what's going on, but it was like she was almost doing her own in conjunction with law enforcement. So, and then just the conversations that we have had with her, or actually my wife has had with her, it really kind of just hit home. And then that emotion last night, like, there's no way you fake that. Like that emotion, just that raw emotion she had last night when she was talking about her mom, and she was willing to talk about the things that everybody has questions about. So.
Yeah, I mean, and for folks who, again, wait till after the show, but then you're going to take a look at it. You were putting out the questions that were coming from social media, and we know everyone's been talking about this case and wondering. But what questions do you still have about that day and the death of Debbie Collier?
Sadly, I think the questions that we have are probably questions that I don't know anyone will ever get an answer to. But, you know, even as a therapist, I see that with people that die by suicide. When someone gets to that point, they're not always thinking rationally. and they make decisions that we don't understand. And I think that that's going to be hard for a lot of people because they want it wrapped up with a bow. And it's not, I mean, we're not going to understand why she went into the woods. We're not going to understand why she bought a tarp and this and that. I just think that it's really going to be hard for any of those questions to be answered.
All right, Candace and Jason from the Crime on the Record podcast staying with us. When we come back, we're going to play a few more clips from the podcast, get reaction from the hosts, plus coming up next hour. In Las Vegas, breaking news, former Playboy model Kelsey Turner accused of murdering her sugar daddy doctor, who was found dead in the trunk of her car, has taken a deal, an Alford plea, and will face 10 to 25 years in prison. Is this justice or the deal of the century?
I lost control. I blacked out. I was really messed up on drugs.
So you killed him?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I did.
Matthew Terry, a convicted domestic abuser, facing the death penalty in the stabbing death of his teacher girlfriend.
The math teacher murder trial. Live coverage continues Monday at 9/8 Central on Court TV.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
Darrell Brooks, who is representing himself, is set to learn his fate.
And you'll see it all right here on Court TV.
The deadly parade crash sentencing. Live coverage Tuesday on
0095.
She's 59 years old. No, she has no medical issues like that. And according to her daughter, who went up and her purse is still here with her driver's license. The only thing is the phone is gone, and she sent her daughter a text about 2 hours ago saying, they won't let me go. Whatever that means, we don't know.
That's the 911 call. Of course, we're talking about the death of Debbie Collier. At first, she was missing. Then she was found dead in the woods. Started as a homicide investigation, and we're hearing now it may not be that. It could end up being a death by suicide. Amanda Bearden is Debbie Collier's daughter. She spoke on the Crime on the Record podcast, revealing interview. Here's part of it.
Well, first of all, I was in a complete state of terror, anger. I mean, I was a basket case because I didn't know what to think. I started calling Steve over and over and over again. I finally got in touch with him while I was on. I actually went over to my mom's house because, I mean, what I had just read, I didn't want to believe.
And of course, reacting to that very cryptic Venmo message and money as well. Let's bring back in Candace and Jason Lawhorn. They are the hosts of the Crime on the Record podcast. Okay, that's always been the thing that I think for everyone, when they first hear about the story, it's the Venmo transfer and the cryptic message. What did Amanda have? Did she have any idea? Did she understand what it was about?
She did not. And I think that's been very hard for people to understand because they assume she'd have every indication when you know, Debbie said that meant she would know who they were. And I think that's part of the reason that she was so caught off guard and confused. And the part of that got her so panicked because she was like, what in the world? I don't understand what she's even saying here.
And how about the money, Jason? A lot of people have been talking about the money. A lot of investigators that I speak to, you know, when they're investigating a crime, a lot of times they say, follow the money. Well, the money leads to her.
Yeah, it does. And she explained on the show last night that they did freeze her accounts, and then they looked at it, whether it be Habersham County, the GBI, the FBI, they looked at it, saw there was nothing criminal that they could see, and they released it back to her. So she currently has the money. She hasn't spent any of it. But for us, I think it's kind of telling that they returned it. I mean, I've never seen where if there's something that's evidence in a case, that they're going to return it to a suspect.
And if it's the proceeds of a crime, you wouldn't either, right? Because a lot of people are wondering, did she Venmo herself? Did she have access to the account? All of that. Let's take a listen to another piece of the interview here. And again, talking about something that you mentioned, which is that relationship, and it's really two relationships. The relationship of the family with police and the relationship of the family to one another. Let's take a listen.
Well, throughout all this, I've had family members, they didn't understand why no one was speaking to them. Well, maybe it was because I didn't harass them. Maybe, even, I'm not going to say they had their opinions of me in the beginning, but I wasn't worried about it. I knew that the truth was going to come out, and I told them, I said, y'all going to end up apologizing to me.
Yeah, definitely part of the interview where you could tell there's a whole lot of tension in the family. And I say the family, Candace, I guess it's kind of your family too, to a certain extent. How would you describe that? Because there was a lot of talk in the podcast about the memorial service and how awkward all of this was because her own family members believed that she was the one responsible.
Yeah, and not just, everyone has all these thoughts and you don't know what's going on and the police aren't telling you anything. So it's only natural to be curious about things. But I think it was so hurtful to her to have family actually vocalize that. I mean, it's kind of like when you're kids, you can talk to my brother like that, but, or I can talk to my brother like that, but you don't talk to him that way. That's not okay. And I think that was the way she expected to be treated by family. Like, look, the world may think this, but your family, you should be standing by my side. And when they didn't do that, I think that was heartbreaking for her.
Now, we had her brother, Jeffrey, on the show, and he talked about his relationship with law enforcement as well, and it seems much, much different. Well, let's take a listen.
So part of my complaint was during the phone call that I had with the sheriff, Mr. Joey Terrell, I was expressing some concerns for the way in which communication has occurred during the investigation, which, I want people to know I'm trying to be very realistic here, and I understand that, you're not always going to be privy to everything, but I was trying to express some of the concerns about the way in which information was being released, some leaks of information that was being given out to the public before the family, based on some reporting and some reporters that I've talked to who said that they got it from law enforcement. And I also wanted to address, what steps have been taken by his office, and then if any, and then what steps could be taken.
So, Jason, Jeffrey was really describing a lot of tension between him and law enforcement and that communication, lack of communication at times. Candace has a completely different relationship, seemingly. Jeffrey really didn't talk about his sister, but Amanda did talk about her brother during your podcast. How would you describe from that interview where you think their relationship is at this point, where they both have suffered this incredible loss of their mom?
I mean, I guess you could infer that it's not great. But during the podcast, there was a reason we didn't go into their relationship. And the reason being is, regardless of whether it's really bad or whatever, we wanted to make sure that at the end of all of this, there's a chance for them to reconcile whatever disagreements they may have right now. The last thing we needed to do was just cause a whole, just a ton of just turmoil and anger between the two while we're talking to her about the death of both of their mother. So we just kind of stayed back from that a little bit. We did just let her, talk about it, but we didn't have any questions specifically for her when it came to that, except for, the memorial service and what that was like. But we didn't want to go deep into that part. We just wanted to make sure that everything was left open for reconciling at a later date if that's what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got that vibe from both of you in the way you were extremely thoughtful in the way you did this interview, which wasn't an easy interview. But Candace, she was the one that seemed to be volunteering some of that information, and felt like she wanted to get it off her chest, because and I don't know why, but she would from time to time say, "I'm going to put this out there," right? And every time she would preface something by saying, "I'm going to put this out there," it was a doozy. Like, it was like, wow, you can tell how much this has really, really impacted her and how tough all this has been. And one of those things was relative to her brother. So what are your thoughts about where she is right now? Kind of like mentally and everything else in her life. You lose your mom, people are pointing the finger at you. Your own family members are suspicious of you. Where do you think she is right now?
I think she's starting to get to a better place. I mean, she's, I think the drug information has people thinking that she has just, she's strung out even right now on her couch, and that is not the case. She did discuss some of that with us, and she has been sober for a while. She has gotten medicated for any mental health struggles she has. She has a very good job. She's working every day. I think that she's really, really trying to get back on track, but it's been so hard with trying to grieve during all of this. So we were really hoping that last night would, if nothing else, give her some kind of closure to start that process.
Well, I've posted the link on my Facebook page so people can go there. It's Crime on the Record. You absolutely need to watch all 90 minutes of this. Candace and Jason, again, incredible work, really. And again, I'm not overselling this, folks. It's like it was so incredibly revealing and real in a story that we've been following here for quite some time from a different place. This puts you into the middle of all of it. So we appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, when we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in some of our experts, get some reaction to what Amanda has revealed, what they think about the status of this investigation, and does it look more like a suicide now? All those questions when we come back.
'66.
I think the reason my mother, the Venmo text read the way that it read was because she knew that I battled with mental health, some pretty serious mental health issues myself. And I think maybe she just said those things to make maybe the acceptance of it easier.
That's Amanda Bearden. She is the daughter of Debbie Collier. Debbie Collier, mysterious death. Originally we thought it was a homicide. Now we're hearing maybe it's not homicide, could be death by suicide. We haven't heard. We just don't know now anymore exactly what happened. But that's her daughter talking about the Venmo message that she received. It was so cryptic and what she took away from it. I want to play more of her. Again, this is from the Crime on the Record podcast. Here describing the moment when officers told her that her mom had passed away.
They were maybe in those woods 10 minutes. And the police officer came back and he said, "Come here." And I knew. Yeah, I've argued with him. I even hit his bulletproof vest a few times. I'm sorry. I didn't hit him, but He was just hugging me. I kept saying, "Where are you sure? Are you sure? How do you know?" You know, and he wouldn't tell me anything. He just said, "Believe me, she's gone."
One of the most emotional parts of that interview. So let's bring in our guests and get a little perspective on what we're talking about tonight. Joining me tonight in Jacksonville, Alabama, Professor of Forensics at Jacksonville State University, former senior investigator for the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, and the host of the Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan, is with us. In Salt Lake City, Utah, private investigator Jason Jensen, who's been following every part of this case very closely. In Orlando, Florida, psychotherapist, CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey is with us. And in Londonderry, New Hampshire, former police officer, founder of the Forensic Education LLC, Michael McCutcheon is with us. Michael, I want to start with you. We just saw those clips, very emotional moment in that interview. As a body language expert, what are you seeing, what are you hearing in that very emotional part of the interview?
So there are a couple of things. I like you said in the earlier segments, I did watch the whole thing. And taking it all together, not just that specific clip, because clearly she's emotional. And I believe that she's emotional. I don't believe she's acting or pretending to be emotional. But when she's describing the build-up until she, to that moment that you just played, she has lots of missing information. And she jumps information. It's kind of like the yada, yada, yada. And then he said this kind of thing. And it's those big gaps in information that as an interrogator or an interviewer trying to get that information, that's where I would be asking, saying, and again, I know in the podcast it's a little different, where I would say, could you just clarify this piece? Could you tell me what you did here before you got there? She mentions, I arrived there, all the police are there, and then I asked to use the bathroom. That's a little strange. I would try to have a little more detail on the descriptors of the entire incident building up to that moment.
And when you say yada, yada, I mean, she literally said yada, yada, yada several times. She was doing that in part of the description. Joseph Scott Morgan, let me ask you about the big part of this, is that she has, she's convinced that her mom died by suicide. She believes that's what investigators are going to reveal at some point. What are your thoughts about what we know? And again, it's limited to a certain extent about what we know about the scene, but the circumstances of this case leading to a potential suicide ruling here.
Well, you know, based upon the limited, and I mean very limited information that we have, it would seem to be an atypical suicide because of the circumstances. I think one of the most striking things for me is the disrobing. You know, they have hinted at least that she was absent her underwear. We've got these burns, and again, they've been very non-specific about that. The most, I guess, specific information that I have heard over the course of time are abdominal burns. And I find that kind of interesting because if it is in fact suicide and fire is involved, that's something that we call self-immolation, and those are very rare. And I've stated on several occasions that over the course of my career, and again, my career is only one little slice of the pie, but in New Orleans and Atlanta, I think I may have worked 2 or 3 over that entire period of time that I've been investigating deaths. They are very rare. So I think I'd like to know what they believe, at least, are the causal factors of her death. And I'm still stumped as to why we don't have an autopsy report yet.
That is obviously the biggest of all pieces, right? Jason Jensen, from your perspective, investigating this and having listened to what Amanda had to say over the course of 90 minutes, what did you hear? What questions do you still have? What things did you learn? What are you questioning about what she may have said?
Yeah, thanks, Vinnie. When I was listening to Amanda in that podcast, what I saw was a lot of genuineness about her And you pointed out earlier that she answers a lot of the questions that we had over the course of this investigation. Like she answered questions about the Venmo. She answered questions about the scene. So when I hear that stuff, coupled with some of the stuff that we had revealed early on, like the surveillance footage and the exterior footage of the Family Dollar, I'm seeing not a crime at all. I'm seeing this death really leans towards suicide. And what I gleaned from it, we're all waiting on the medical examiner autopsy to come out. I'm expecting this to be butane inhalation, to be honest.
Dr. Janie Lacey, couple things here. One, we're talking about a potential suicide, but I want to talk first about Amanda. At the end of the interview, they spend some time talking about her being diagnosed as bipolar. And she's admitted that she has had some problems with drugs in the past. I know that's a bad combination, but I know people will, if they're struggling, they'll self-medicate. What are your thoughts about that part of her life and now being put in the middle of all of this?
I think it was very vulnerable for her to put out that information, as well as talking about her drug abuse issues. And it is very common when we see someone that has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, if they're not following their psychologist or psychiatrist's recommendations, then there's a lot of turmoil that can happen internally. So then there is a lot of self-medication, drug abuse, self-harm, and we see a lot of different ways of which someone will try to regulate all the chaos and all the things that they may feel inside. So for her to share that information could probably make some sense as we look at her life, and particularly if there was some family history of mental illness as well.
Let me give the follow-up now. We've seen the video, and Amanda confirmed that that's her mom in the surveillance video from the dollar store, the Family Dollar store. This is the other part of this case I can't get beyond, is that it's game day. It's literally Saturday, game day, college football. She's an Alabama, Georgia Bulldog fan. I don't know if you can be a fan of both, but she was. She's dressed up in red. She's got her jersey on, her visor. And that's when she's going to take her life? Like, is that a disconnect, or is that just, it doesn't mean anything? Like, you're dressed up for game day.
When we look at someone who has had death by suicide and we look at the steps that have happened before them, sometimes we'll see some patterns, and sometimes we'll see things that are not, that do not make sense. So when we look at her behavior on what we can see in the record and the video and those types of things, I don't necessarily put a lot of weight on it either or, because we know just with our research and with evidence that sometimes there's not a typical pattern depending on the circumstances of the person in particular. But once we see all the moving pieces and we put some context to it, as far as we look at from the psychological perspective, it will make sense in the context of the story that we can lay out. But just looking at that one piece with what we know, it doesn't necessarily ring any type of bells or put anything that's not unusual when it comes to someone that may have committed or may have died by suicide.
All right, guests staying with us. We're going to talk more about this. We've got more from the interview of Amanda Bearden. Also, coming up next hour. In Los Angeles, California, sitcom star from that 70s show, Danny Masterson, on trial accused of raping 3 women from the Church of Scientology. Prosecutors wrapping up their case, and we have a live report from L.A.
I think it's a tribute to law enforcement that he's being prosecuted.
Friend, family member, murderer?
You never know what's real behind the scenes.
You can only handle so much before you snap.
Someone They Knew with Tamron Hall. All-day marathon. Beginning Friday morning, 9/8 Central on Court TV.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
Darrell Brooks, who is representing himself, is set to learn his fate.
And you'll see it all right here on Court TV.
The Deadly Parade crash sentencing. Live coverage Tuesday on
Human Way to Healthcare.
key family member accused me of murder. And the next thing I know, I'm in a cop car being taken away for an interrogation. They all thought I did it. They all came out and told me to my face they think I did it. Some of them lied about it.
Unbelievable moment in that podcast where Amanda Bearden's talking about going to the memorial service for her mom and family members coming up to her face, accusing her of murdering her mother. Let's bring back in our guests, Joseph Scott Morgan, Jason Jensen, Dr. Janie Lacey, and Michael McCutcheon with us. Michael, your thoughts. Were there any indicators, you watched the entire podcast, any indicators of deceit where maybe she was saying something and kind of, some things that you look for?
Similar to my my point in the beginning of when she gives very specific details throughout when it doesn't really mean anything about when she's driving or if she stopped here and then if she did this, very, very specific. But then when you're getting to the points that have very specific meaning, then it disappears. That specificity disappears, the you-knows come in. But it's that speech pattern, that you know, isn't there when she's telling a long part of her story and she's giving you a lot of information and you're going, okay, all right, let's get to what you want to tell me. And then when we get to the part of how she got there, where her mom was and how she arrived, it's 1 minute of a 15-minute story. And I see that very deceptive, where I'm trying to overwhelm you with facts and details to try to draw your attention, like, oh, well, this can't be made up because you've given me a lot of facts. Not a lot of facts about the specific thing I'm asking about, but it's a very common deceptive technique. And then the other piece I think they said it in one of the segments. So she said the Venmo message of they, that pronoun to me is what really just jumped out without any before or after, just referring to someone as they or assuming that the other person knows who you're talking about. They did something, and I'm telling you that. You should know who they is. And I found that to be very peculiar.
Joseph Scott Morgan, how about the family dynamics? You're at the memorial and your own family members are pointing the finger at you. Do you put any weight in that in an investigation?
Well, I think that you have to, those individuals that are in your intimate circle, you're going to know more about the individuals historically, going back, problems in the family and that sort of thing. So maybe there was suspicion on the part of some of the family members because of some of the familial histrionics. But I don't know how much weight I would assign to it. Again, Vinnie, you're talking to a scientist. So I am going to lean more toward the science in this case because there's so much to deal with here that it's going to point us into the direction as opposed to more of the speculative side. I think there are going to be far more answers revealed in the scientific testing that's going to come.
Jason Jensen, were you surprised that she sat there for 90 minutes?
Well, yeah, as soon as I caught word that she was live on a podcast last night, I had to find it because I did not expect that to happen. She's been more or less, identified as a prime suspect in her mother's murder because of the Venmo and, the fact that she's benefiting from that. We're thinking, there's been a lot of speculation that was somebody in the back of the van and was that them? And we over time have discussed, well, the cell phone GPS data from Amanda's phone or her boyfriend Andrew's phone or something would be revealing and identify whether or not they were in the vicinity of Debbie's van and the trip to the Family Dollar. But it's been unfair that so much information kind of leaned towards Amanda to begin with, and now we get to hear Amanda's side where, it sounds like she's innocent.
We are out of time tonight. We'll continue to cover this story. Thank you so much, everyone.